Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Lots of stuff we're going to get into today in a world of baseball, sports, and unified America. Hope everybody had a nice weekend. A lot of different things going on in a world of sports. Of course, you had playoffs. You know, the Cavs even up to the series against the Boston Celtics. And you got to be honest, I'll touch on it in a little bit. Not much of a surprise. You can see the distinct home court advantage that exists in that series. The players that are on a court, in this series in particular, seem to be impacted by the crowd a little bit more. If you watch the first couple of games in Boston, you know, it just seemed like the Cavs were kind of taken out of their game by the presence of the crowd. And if you followed the game last night, it just seems the Cavaliers got off to such a good start. And, you know, it didn't necessarily blow them out. It wasn't like they were up by like 30 or 40 points. You know, but they had a consistent double-digit lead through the better part of the first half and into the third quarter. And it just got to a point where, you know, it became a little too much for the Celtics to come back in. And obviously, you look at the position that both of the teams are in, and obviously, you know, it seems like it's a series that can draw out and perhaps get into 7 games. But if it does, I think it pretty much favors the Boston Celtics. But what have we said before? 7th game, anything can happen. And I remember Warriors-Cavs Game 7 2 years ago. I thought that there was no chance that the Cavs were going to be able to pull it off. Came down to a last shot type of situation, and Kyrie Irving hit the big 3, and the Cavs ended up winning. But, you know, we will touch on that in a little bit. The first thing I wanted to start out by talking about today is the Preakness, and obviously justify winning the second leg of the Triple Crown, making the upcoming Belmont Stakes a lot more interesting to a lot of people. And in all seriousness, I mean, there are a lot of people that bet on horses. There's people that are involved in the world of horse racing and kind of look at it as being, you know, bigger fans than other people. But I would say 98% of the people in this country could really care less about horse racing. And the only thing that draws them in is the potential and the possibility that the same horse has a chance to win the Triple Crown in Belmont. That's all that just about everybody that has any interest in horse racing is hoping for. And justify, obviously, winning the Kentucky Derby and the ridiculous odds that existed with this horse. I mean, it was 2-5 odds by the time the race started. Everybody got their wish, or the majority of the people got their wish. The Belmont Stakes is going to be a huge event. You know, you're not going to be able to buy tickets for there. It's going to be that ridiculous in regards to the draw that it's going to be. Millions and millions upon millions of people are going to watch it. And listen, I don't come at horse racing as if I'm somebody that knows a ton about it. I listen, I absorb things, I'll learn a couple things here and there. So I don't consider myself a person that should be given any sort of advice. But I'll tell you this, from an entertainment standpoint, for anybody that was following horse racing for the first time, or was the casual fan, or did not exactly know the motion of events that were going to be set in place once the Preakness pregame show came on, I feel bad for you. And I'm sorry that you had to waste your time. Because that broadcast was like a student in a classroom sticking his fingers on the eraser board and scraping it around for 2 hours. The broadcasters on the show, I mean, for God's sakes, I mean, you have Bob Costas and Mike Tirico, two of the best broadcasters in the business. Bob Costas is a legend. and they can't even keep you updated on when this race is going to kick off. I mean, how many times do you got to hear, oh, this is, blah, blah, blah about the race, blah, blah, blah about this horse. You ever hear of a newscast, whether it's on TV or on radio, they want to give you the time and the temperature? This Preakness pregame show couldn't give you the time of the freaking race. And I'm sitting here watching this race, flipping between channels like, all right, is the race going to come on about 6:20 now? Maybe it's around 6:30. Maybe it's 6:37. Maybe 6:45. Wait a second. The Preakness pregame show is scheduled from 5 to 7. It's 5 minutes to 7, and the race is just about to kick off. I understand it's only a minute or so. But, it actually, if you're watching the postscript of, interviewing the jockey and the owner and the trainer afterwards, it's actually cutting into the next broadcast, which on NBC, it's a live NHL playoff hockey game. And I don't know. Did they stick to any sort of schedule? And this part, I'm not blaming NBC. I'm blaming horse racing. Do you know when your races are going to kick off? I tell you, from an entertainment standpoint and a viewer standpoint, it turned me off. And I'm sure it impacted a lot of other people that were following the race. What is the main thing that you're looking for when you turn on NBC and you're watching for the Preakness? That minute and a half where the horses are actually racing. And I understand you can have some buildup, but you should keep that buildup to, a half hour, maybe an hour tops. And I understand during the Super Bowl you got, hours upon hours upon hours of coverage. But I don't see them coming up with a 24-hour horse racing network anytime soon. And if you did, all you're really going to run is the classic races, which, let's be serious, are going to finish in a minute and a half. But I tell you, it blew my mind. And it wasn't like it even came down to the last minute. This was in an hour and 58 minutes and 20 seconds of pre-race and in a minute and 40 seconds of horse race. This actually started at about, 7 o'clock or after 7 o'clock. And by the time they were done with the postscript, the interviews, interviewing everybody that won and, giving some commentary on what they thought about the race, you're about 5-10 minutes into the first period of the hockey game. And a hockey game ain't going to wait for a horse race. But I tell you, the question I guess I would have to ask for the horse racing fans, is this something that's determined beforehand? Is it just one of those, hey, we got to wait for all the horses to get ready? Sometimes they're not. We understand that, you can't ask a horse and get a straight answer from a horse. Sometimes maybe it takes a little while to get a horse into the stable and ready and prepared to race. If that's a legitimate answer to my question, then I kind of get it. But if not, what the hell is going on? I feel bad for anybody that wasted their time listening to the commentary of this upcoming Preakness for 2 hours. Because I know you were asking yourself the same thing. I tuned in to watch the race. Where's the race? Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Glad to be with you. We'll be on with you until about 8 o'clock today. We'll see how things go today. Maybe we'll do another show from 6 to 7. I'm going to follow some topics going on in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. And if I feel it necessary, we'll come on again tonight. If not, we'll be back with you tomorrow, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern. The New York Mets apparently have a little bit of interest in Jose Bautista. And obviously, anytime something is centric to a team here in New York City, it's going to be blown out and made into be more of a big deal than what it is. 2 points I'm going to make about this, and then I'm going to move on. First one, his contract with the Atlanta Braves was set up for about $1 million. And once he was added to the 40-man roster, that kicked in. So Jose Bautista is owed $1 million for the rest of the season. That being said, even if it was $1 million straight up, it's not going to make a major impact on any team's payroll. Now, you take out the prorated portion of the league minimum salary, which Bautista would be getting if he signed with any team at this point because he was released from his contract. The Braves would still have to pick up about, $450,000 for the rest of the year. So from a financial standpoint, it makes sense. The other part that makes sense is the Mets don't have any right-hand hitting power in their lineup. Now, I understand Bautista was batting 143. He did hit 2 home runs. He obviously is far removed from the great player that he was in the early part of the 2010s. But I tell you, it's a risk that is not that big of a deal to take, considering the Mets have a complete left-hand hitting outfield right now. And they have a left-hand hitting first baseman. There's 4 regulars that are all left-handed, and you can't run them all out there against your typical left-hand pitching. The Mets have probably the worst offense in regards to hitting left-hand pitching in all of Major League Baseball. And what's the worst that could happen? I mean, if this guy stinks up the joint or he acts like an asshole, then all you got to do is just run him out, and then you're back to where you started. So anybody that has any issue with this, just sign him, bring him in, let him play against some left-hand pitching. And you know what? The Mets lineup looks a little bit better if you're running Wilmer Flores and you're running Bautista out there against left-handers. Right now, it looks like a joke. And, I've been pondering this all weekend. You talk about the fact that the Mets, right now at this point, have won 4 straight games. Has there ever been a team that's been on a winning streak that you didn't feel as much as this winning streak exists with the New York Mets? It is, in definition, a winning streak because they've won 4 games in a row. But, man, I'll tell you, none of them look like they were dominant performances by any stretch of the imagination. The Mets were carried by the strength of their pitching, and in a lot of cases, their starting pitching. But, they scored 2 runs last night against the Miami Marlins. So if you think this team is going on a ridiculous run to all of a sudden stake claim to a playoff spot in the National League, you're sadly mistaken. And similar to the Mets when they were on that 11-1 stretch to start the season, I'd hate to throw a little shade their way, but it's something that is not sustainable. And it's not sustainable unless at some point this team starts to hit. And that's why I am in favor of bringing in Jose Bautista, just for a shot-in-the-dark chance they could catch a little bit of lightning in a bottle. Because this is a team that goes through the motions offensively. I understand that they are missing a considerable amount of the players that they're depending on. Cespedes isn't there. Frazier isn't there. They brought in Devin Mesoraco to be their starting catcher because their 2 catchers are out. I get it. Jose Reyes, is probably a couple days or maybe a couple weeks away from being DFA'd. There's a lot that isn't going right offensively with this team. And you know what? If you want to be optimistic and say that they're sitting right now 24-19, sure, you could do that. Rich Catino will tell you, great reason to be optimistic. The Mets are over 500. That's nice. But sometimes you have to put some perspective on what it is that you're looking at. You could win a couple games, sure. You win a 2-0 game or win a couple 1- and 2-run games over a series of some weeks. You have more wins than losses. Yes, as a fan, you'd rather see your team win a game than lose a game. But I'm sorry to throw some cold water on optimism. And you can't expect them to do anything else than win. They've won their last 4 games. Good for them. Should be proud of them. But unless this team is going to get any sort of consistent performance from their offense, it's only going to last a little while. And they may have to get as much as they possibly can out of this, because going in the other direction, losing some 1-2 run games in addition to the games they're going to lose just because they can't score, the games they're going to lose if their starting pitcher, God forbid, has a bad performance, And you know what's going to happen. Steven Matz and Zach Wheeler are amongst the most inconsistent starting pitchers in the National League. They could give you 5 or 6 solid, but they're also going to have that blow-up inning almost religiously. So unless this team's offense is going to show something that they have not shown at this point this season, it's not going to look good. You know, the 24-19 could be their high water mark for the rest of the season. And I hate to say this off of 4 straight wins. I mean, I know they play the Marlins again tonight, but, I mean, how excited are you going to be when you got a team that is not capable of scoring any more than 2 or 3 or 4 runs in a given game? Because most other teams in Major League Baseball have the ability to score more than that. And all it takes is a bad performance from one of your starters. All it takes is a bad performance from one of your relievers. You know, the Mets had that 6th inning yesterday where they ended up using 3 pitchers. You know, A.J. Ramos gets out of a bases-loaded jam. Then the next inning he gets a double play. I mean, they were a base hit away from that game turning out completely different. And you also can't expect your relievers to go out there and throw zeros every single game. And if every game is determined by 1 or 2 runs, you're going to lose some games soon because, you know, there is, you know, imperfection that exists in a world of relief pitching. I know it's so much better than it used to be because you got multiple options. Every team has, you know, between 3 and 6 or 7 pitchers that throw 95 to 100 miles an hour. And you know what? If those pitchers are on, if they're locating, if they got movement, if their secondary pitchers are moving, they're probably unhittable. But what if they're not? What if command is off? When you're looking at A.J. Ramos, it's like a flip of a coin whether he's got command or not. And it's not even a knock against any of the relief pitchers. It's the relief pitching in general. It is a little thicker. It is a little fickle, I'm sorry. The possibility that any reliever, especially when you're going 2-3 relievers a game at least, may not have it in a 1 or 2 run game could cost you on any given game. Bautista, bring him in. Because the Mets could not be any worse against left-hand pitching. And their offense needs a little bit of a jolt. I understand he's hitting 143 and got released by the Atlanta Braves. Maybe there's more to the story. Maybe he didn't mesh well with Brian Snitker. Maybe he was not a positive influence on that clubhouse. The Braves are in first place. Is this addition by subtraction by removing Jose Bautista from the team? Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Be with you until about 8 o'clock today. Another thing I wanted to get into today is going back to basketball. And obviously we'll open the comment feed, whether it's Facebook or Periscope or any other way you want to interact with the program. Just let me know what's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. You know, I look at the Boston Celtics, and once again we'll go back to the Cavs and the Celtics because I think it's an interesting series to watch because if you watch the first 2 games, it looked like a lot of people that were expecting the Cavaliers to win in 5 or 6 games, all of a sudden were kind of looking silly because not only did the Celtics win the first 2 games, but they dominated the first 2 games. They mopped the court up. They mopped, you know, the new equivalent of the Boston Garden up with LeBron James and his cast. So after those first 2 games, even the die-hardest of Cavaliers fans or the die-hardest of those in the media that predicted that the Cavaliers would win this series so easy had to start having some doubts, had to start having a little bit of fear of what was going on. You know, the fact that the Cavaliers had not very much come close to showing up over the first 2 games of this series. It was all Celtics to that point. And obviously the Cavs putting things together in Game 3 with a very big blowout victory on Saturday. Played a game last night where I didn't think they were as dominant. But LeBron obviously showed up, the 44 points plus. He didn't have as much of a supporting cast, though. His guys did a little bit. They did enough. It was a double-digit lead for the majority of the game. I think it turned out to be a 9-point win or a 10-point win or something like that. Now, as you get set for Game 5 in Boston, this does become a huge game for the Celtics. And I think the Celtics are going to come away and win it. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue for them. I do believe that the home court advantage is going to continue to prevail through this series. Which, if I'm the Cleveland Cavaliers, I have a little fear. Because if for some reason the series goes to 7 games, especially if all the home teams win, and all the home teams win distinctively or by a considerable amount of points, you don't see too many series that go this way that break pattern in a 7th game. That being said, it is a 7th game, so it's like a 1-game playoff. Anything can happen. The home court, which may have at some point been an advantage, may not necessarily be, since it's a winner-take-all game. But I think it would behoove the Cavaliers if they could find a way to steal this game in Game 5. My interest in it from the potential upset standpoint, and let's be serious, the way these games have gone in this particular series, it would be an upset if the road team won one of these next couple games. And the Cavaliers, by winning Games 3 and Games 4 in Cleveland, have put a little more pressure on the Boston Celtics as the Celtics come home for Game 5. If the Celtics had split and were up 3-1, you would have the arena filled up with Celtics fans that were hoping that they could close it out on their home court, but also with a little bit of a cushion to know that if you didn't win, you still got 2 more games to pull it off. Cavs are down 3-1. They'd have to win the next 3. Now they're in a position where if they have a slip-up, if LeBron James could get the rest of his team ridiculously motivated to where Korver's hitting shots, and Smith is hitting shots, and Kevin Love is hitting shots, and it ends up coming down to a last possession, which, by the way, all the heads that were out there talking about this series said that every game was going to come down to a last possession. We're still waiting for that type of game. And this is where it could benefit the Cavaliers if Game 5 turns out to be that type of back-and-forth game where it comes down to the last possession and it comes down to LeBron James or him passing the ball to a Korver or Smith to hit that last shot. The Cavaliers may have a chance to steal this game. And if they do, I think they're going to be pretty much in position to close out the series in 6 games. If the Celtics can keep the pace up in regards to blowing the Cavs out in their home court or on their home court, the Cavaliers are going to have to come back, find a way to win at home, which I think they'd be favorited, but there's no guarantee. And then would have to find some way to pull off Game 7 in Boston. So the Cavaliers, I'm going to play the best odds that I could play. If they're going to win this series, they're going to have to win it in 6. And I understand if Game 7 turns out to be that, miraculous back-and-forth game that comes down to the last possession, and it's either up to LeBron to hit a shot or pass, or the person he passes the ball to hit the shot for them to win, then it'd be exciting. But I don't see it going that way. And I'd have a little bit of fear of it going that way if I am the Cavaliers. So I think Game 5 probably becomes as big of a game for the Cleveland Cavaliers as if they were down 3-1. And I think the Cavaliers have to treat it that way. I don't know if they will. And I don't know how much motivation you could throw at a group of players that are playing, within a couple games of getting to the NBA Finals and having a chance to win a championship. I don't know how you teach motivation with that. But obviously, anybody that's not in that situation, if you're an NBA player that is on a team that is no longer active in the postseason, you'd love to be in that spot. So if you got to teach these guys motivation and get them to want to care, get them to want to play a game with a sense of urgency, as if everything is on the line, then I don't know how you do it. But you get your team to a point where you're even 2-2, Game 5 in Boston. Perhaps there's a little momentum swinging towards Cleveland because they won the last 2 games. But I do believe the Celtics are going to be energized by their home crowd. Similarly energized as they were during the beginning of the first 2 games of the series. Cavaliers got to find a way to break that. Because I really do believe if they don't win Game 5, even after winning Games 3 and 4 on their home court, even if they lose Game 5 and win Game 6 in Cleveland, it doesn't bode well for them. You look at 7-game series where the home team has won each one of the games. When you get to Game 7, it doesn't bode well for that road team. So I think it'd be very advantageous for the Cleveland Cavaliers to win game number 5. Still time to sign up for the parish picnic over at St. Aloysius Church. It'll take place on Sunday, June 3rd. Sunday, June 3rd at Pine Park in Lakewood. The AYM Youth Ministry will be organizing and hosting a fun series of games and activities for children. We need help for teens in grades 7 through 12 to help host these activities. To sign up, visit the link of formsite.com/JoeyTun, TUN 22, /FORM17-index HTML, or contact Joey Tun, the coordinator of youth and young adult ministry. His phone number is 732-370-0500, extension 202. You can also email youth ministry, youthministry, at staloysiusonline.org. Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you on the 22nd day of May 2018, obviously a couple days away from Memorial Day weekend. And if you think about it as it applies to Major League Baseball, really exists as the first barometer to kind of determine where a team is in an important part of the season. You could say a lot of things happen in the first couple weeks of baseball, and every year you see certain teams get off to really good starts that are not very sustainable. You have very good teams that get off to bad starts, and you're like, hey, it's just a matter of time before things start clicking on all cylinders and the team starts becoming what was expected. The only real lessons that I've learned this year that we kind of knew already, that were kind of reinforcements of what was told to us, the narrative that was spoken to us in the offseason, is that the New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox are really good. You're looking at 2 teams in Major League Baseball that are hands down better than anybody else. They happen to be playing in the same division. If you go back to the late 1970s, perhaps 1978, the big pennant race, certain times in the late 90s, but obviously in the early part of 2000s, 2003, 2004. We talk about the Yankees and Red Sox rivalry like this is something that goes back down to the inception of the American League, or goes back to the days where the New York Yankees were known as the New York Highlanders. And I think if there's anything that's more overblown in the world of sports in regards to rivalries, is this perceived rivalry as we hit the halfway point here on the Pass Ball Show. We've introduced the show a bunch of times today, so I'm not going to do it again. But, the perceived rivalry that exists between the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, I believe is overstated. And I'm going to tell you it is for this reason. Unless you are a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan, you obviously dislike the opposition. Perhaps if you're a player on one of the teams, maybe there's a little bit of bad blood. You go back to a situation that happened earlier in the season with Tyler Austin charging him out against Joe Kelly. You want to go back to Ryan Dempster hitting A-Rod or throwing at him, 3 straight pitches or 4 straight pitches. The A-Rod and Bronson Arroyo with the brawl with the Varitek. Obviously, the Pedro Martinez stuff. There's stuff that's happened within the last, decade plus, that would probably reaffirm the belief that there is an intense rivalry that exists between the Yankees and the Boston Red Sox. I don't believe so much in that. The problem that exists is the couple times in the history of the Boston Red Sox franchise, this century not included, or this past decade or two not included. Let's talk about 20th century baseball for a second. Because if you want to incite that there's this ridiculous rivalry between the Yankees and the Red Sox, you'd want to assume that it goes back for years upon years. So you have nearly 100 years of baseball that are played in the 20th century. Obviously, the American League doesn't start until 1901. 1901 and 1902, there's a franchise in Baltimore called the Orioles that ends up being contracted. They end up awarding a team to New York. And for the 1903 season, the New York Highlanders come into Major League Baseball. They're called the Highlanders through 1914, become the Yankees after that. So once they become the Yankees, there's still very little involved in regards to what you'd call a rivalry. Obviously, the first turning point that fans would always point to say that there is a rivalry between the Yankees and the Boston Red Sox involves the sale of Babe Ruth to the Yankees before the 1920 season. Now, at that point, the New York Yankees and Highlanders had not accomplished very much. The Boston Red Sox were one of the more successful franchises, and in fact, at that point, after the 1919 season, they had won more World Series than any other team in Major League Baseball history. And I understand we're only talking about 19 years or 18 years, 18 World Series that have been played at that point. But tell me it's not impressive that the Red Sox had won 5 World Series by that point. The Yankees up to that time frame had not established themselves. The big turning point in their history was them adding Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth transformed baseball. The Yankees became one of the more successful teams in the 1920s, the team in the 1930s, and after Ruth had come, DiMaggio followed, Mantle came, and if you look at the history of the Yankees over the better part of the next 50 years or 40 years, there probably hadn't been a better run in the history of professional sports. And while it may have coincided a little bit with the Boston Red Sox moving of Babe Ruth to the Yankees or selling of Babe Ruth to the Yankees, it wasn't a rivalry. When I think of a rivalry, I think of what we've seen over the last 10, 12 years with the Yankees. 10, 15 years with the Yankees and Red Sox. I think of Don Zimmer getting flung on the ground. I think of, A-Rod slugging it out or, wrestling with Jason Varitek. I think of, Greg Nettles punching Bill Lee in the face, in that 77 or 78 brawl. That's what I think of when I think of Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. And in all honesty, sure, they may have had some fights or some battles, but it wasn't as intense as anybody makes it out to be. We make it like Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams were bitter rivals and hated each other. They may not have necessarily gotten along, but I'm sure they respected each other. But when the Yankees played the Red Sox, the Yankees had such a superior advantage over the Boston Red Sox. And, you could tell Ted Williams probably took it personally. He hated the Yankees because the Yankees always beat him. But going back to the days of Ruth, who did the Boston Red Sox have? that set themselves up to be competitive. After they won the World Series in 1918 over the Chicago Cubs, they didn't get back to the World Series until 1946. And remember, that was a time in the 1940s where a lot of players were missing because of their service in World War II. Now, some, had left and come back by then, but others had left and still hadn't come back by then. That's why the St. Louis Browns made it to the World Series in 1944. The World Series in 46 between the Red Sox and the Cardinals stood out because you were looking at two all-time players getting a chance to play against each other in Ted Williams and Stan Musial. And the Red Sox, for once, were able to take advantage of a time and an opportunity where the New York Yankees were down. The Yankees had won their four straight World Series from 36 to 39. Won again in 41, won again in 43. But after the Yankees won the World Series in 1943 against the St. Louis Cardinals, they started to get a little bit old. They started to drop a little bit. Bill Dickey wasn't the same. Some of the players that had hung around as long as they did were not able to give the same sort of contributions that they did earlier. The great and legendary Joe McCarthy ends up leaving. Ironically, takes the job in Boston as the Boston Red Sox manager eventually. Not the year in 46 when they made it to the World Series. So opportunity existed, and the Red Sox took advantage of it and made it to their first World Series in 28 years. Didn't go well. The Cardinals won. But then the Red Sox would have to go nearly another 20 years before they made it to the World Series again. And what happened? The Yankees probably had the best run in the history of Major League Baseball over that time. Between Red Sox World Series appearances in 46 and 67, how many World Series championships did the Yankees win? Starting in 47, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 56, 58, 61, and 62. Yankees won 10 World Series championships between Boston Red Sox World Series appearances. And I'm not trying to disparage the Boston Red Sox fan. My point is that this Yankees-Red Sox rivalry that we talk about is way overblown and overstated. So the Red Sox get there in 67. The Yankees obviously go through one of the worst stretches in their franchise history from their World Series appearance in 64 till the time they got back there in 76. And the Red Sox actually make two World Series appearances in between Yankee World Series appearances. Yankees lost the World Series in 1964 to Johnny Keane and the St. Louis Cardinals. They made it back to the World Series in 1976 when the Cincinnati Reds beat them. So between 64 and 76, the Red Sox got the two World Series themselves in 67 and 75. Of course, they didn't win either one of them. And that same big red machine that beat the Red Sox in 75 swept the Yankees in 76. So it really didn't happen until the Yankees kind of got better. And there was that little overlap where they were both good at the same time in the latter part of the 70s. But if you're older than 40 years old, or older than 50 years old, you don't look at the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees rivalry in the same way that a lot of younger kids and younger fans do today. There might be a little bit of intense, despising or hatred. Certainly between the fans, perhaps between the players as well. But it didn't exist before that. And we kind of get misconstrued or misled by the thought of Babe Ruth being sold from the Red Sox to the Yankees, that it created this ridiculous amount of hostility. And it never really did. Red Sox went on their own way. Unfortunately, struggled to put anything positive together, which obviously coincided with Ruth going to the Yankees. But I will say this. I don't know what existed in regards to Babe Ruth's interest in pitching. Maybe he still wanted to pitch. Or maybe the Red Sox viewed him as a pitcher and maybe he didn't want to pitch. Maybe he wanted to be a full-time hitter. But he obviously was the biggest and strongest asset that the Boston Red Sox had. And it wasn't like he was the only one. Harry Frazee had sold off a lot of players, a lot of them to the Yankees, in exchange for money because he wasn't making ends meet and wanted to finance things such as Broadway shows and plays and stuff of that nature. But we always make it out like the Red Sox and the Yankees got this, Hatfield and McCoy type of mentality from them, that this hatred goes back for generations upon generations. Let me remind the modern day baseball fan to read a friggin' history book. Maybe if you stopped obsessing over weighted on base average and analytical stats by staring at a computer screen, you'd go back and appreciate the history of Major League Baseball. Because it goes back a far time, and you'll also learn a lot more than what you think you know. Red Sox and Yankees, sure, they're going to be in a great pennant race this year. It may be considered the biggest boiling over point and period in their rivalry's history. But prior to the 1970s, prior to the late 1970s, there was no Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you. The number, if you're interested, 732-364-3598, or you can comment on the Facebook Live or Periscope feed. Last thing I wanted to get into has been a pretty hot topic over the last couple days, and I think, most fans have finally got their heads out of the water and have realized that the Las Vegas Golden Knights are going to the Stanley Cup Finals. And this is where everybody comes out of the woodwork. And, Good Morning America and your regular gossip and slander shows bring this story up as if it's some sort of human interest. Yet you haven't followed anything that has happened over the course of the entire season. And I'm not going to claim to be the most die-hardest of die-hard hockey fans, but I follow the sport. I could have told you, a couple weeks or a couple months into the season that the Vegas Golden Knights were a pretty good hockey team. What they had right from the start was a little bit of continuity. The fact that there was cohesion amongst this team that was assembled, which doesn't stand on track with most of what we've seen out of expansion teams in professional sports. It's kind of hard to do. It's kind of hard to pull a group of players off the street in some cases. But even if you wanted to not disparage, make that comment that disparaging, to say a collective unit of players from other teams and draft picks and free agents can all come together to unify as a championship team. It's a very tough sell. And what it really kind of sounds like is one of those things in scripts that you hear in the movies. There's always those movies. I think of Major League because the owners' disdain for the franchise and wanted to move it to Miami assembled this group of, misfits that all came together. And, first of all, we're not expected to be very good, but also had never played together before. And I think that's the one part of sports that we don't, as fans, understand and appreciate enough. A lot of teams that have success and are able to do very well, win championships, and sustain that over a long period of time, have a good cohesion amongst themselves. They may not necessarily have to be best friends. They might not necessarily all be going out to dinner every single night, but there has to be a level of respect and understanding and knowledge amongst each other, which seems to be a common thread amongst very good teams. So when you're doing that on a fly, there's a little bit of time that exists that you have to put yourself together to not just to know each other. I don't think it's that simple of just knowing and liking each other. Like, in other words, if the Vegas Golden Knights assembled a team of mostly former Pittsburgh Penguins and former Chicago Blackhawks, in other words, assembled a group of players that were used to playing with each other before, I don't know if that would necessarily give them an advantage. But they were behind the eight ball because, first of all, they had to assemble a team, but also behind the eight ball again because they didn't have any sort of cohesion amongst their own unit. They had a very large group of players that had not played together before. So that's why when we're setting up the odds in Vegas, and obviously, no pun intended, Vegas is Vegas. Vegas happens to have a hockey team, so, we're going to be referring to both as Vegas right now. But, the Vegas Golden Knights were 500 to 1 odds to win the Stanley Cup. And those odds were set by Vegas not as a way that was giving an indication of what the team was about, but it was more about the history of expansion teams in professional sports. The fact that there can be or has been so many groups of expansion teams, whether it's expansion in hockey past the original six, or baseball that started expansion in the 1960s. Basketball as the ABA and the NBA emerged, and the expansion teams that have come since then, and obviously the 90s and the 2000s, where you've seen even more expansion in all major sports. The one thing that they've all had in common is they've all realized right off the bat how hard it is to compete in all these professional leagues. The expansion draft helps you. Some teams have been more aggressive. If we remember the 1998 Tampa Bay Devil Rays, they were very aggressive. They signed Wade Boggs. They brought in guys like Jose Canseco and Fred McGriff. And, you think of Wilson Alvarez. They were very aggressive in regards to their pursuit of competition in Major League Baseball right away. Did it work out for them? Not really. If you go back a couple of years before that, the Colorado Rockies had a similar, aggressive type of nature. Got themselves to the playoffs in their third year in 1995. Which, by the way, there was no playoffs in 1994. So the second year that they were in Major League Baseball, that they were in the postseason, they were there. The Marlins trumped them by winning a World Series a couple of years later. The Arizona Diamondbacks won a World Series in 2001 in what was their fourth full season. So there's been a little bit of a precedent, but the one common thread is that it takes a little bit of time to do it. There has not been a team that has gone out there and done what the Vegas Golden Knights have done in their first season. And obviously a lot has to go towards their coach, their coaching staff, their front office for assembling this team, but a lot has to go towards the players. They seem to be a very cohesive unit. And I think that was what had separated them from the Winnipeg Jets, who I thought were a very good team. I thought the Jets could win that series because they had a little bit of superior talent. They didn't have the cohesion that the Vegas Golden Knights had. So I think as they get set for the Stanley Cup Finals, as they're waiting to see if Tampa Bay can close out the series tonight, or if the series is going to go to 7 games, and maybe the Capitals will play them. They were saying from an odds standpoint that the Washington Capitals had the best odds to win the Stanley Cup. Obviously, it's gone down with the Lightning taking a 3-2 series lead. But I would think whatever team comes out of the Eastern Conference would probably have the better odds to win the Stanley Cup. Now, once again, as I've mentioned a couple times on the show already, it's a very good human interest story. So there's a lot of casual hockey fans to fair weather hockey fans to pretty good hockey fans that are on the bandwagon of the Vegas Golden Knights and, not are necessarily going to say, hey, I'm a fan of that team, but are pulling for them and rooting for them to win the whole thing. There's also the, traditional hockey fan that may have a particular team that they're interested in. Maybe they are a longtime New York Rangers fan. Maybe they are a longtime Boston Bruins fan or Toronto Maple Leafs fan and have followed their team for a long period of time and understand because of their passionate amount of years spent following the National Hockey League, that it's not that easy to win a Stanley Cup. And if this team in Vegas could come in to the league in its first season and win the entire thing, how does that make the other fans of the other teams feel? And it probably does make you feel pretty lousy, especially if your team hadn't won a Stanley Cup in a long time. But obviously, you look at a lot of the major markets in hockey have gotten Stanley Cups, within the last, 25, 30 years. Even the Rangers winning in 1994. I know it seems like it's a little bit of a long time ago. But, there's a lot of people that have seen that Stanley Cup. You've seen Stanley Cups in Boston and Los Angeles and Chicago and Pittsburgh and Detroit. The one thing about the National Hockey League is, especially over the last 30 years or so, you've seen a lot of different teams have a chance to win. And I know we're coming off of a period where the Pittsburgh Penguins have a series of players who have won 3 Stanley Cups. A lot of their team right now, as they were eliminated by the Washington Capitals, had won the last 2 Stanley Cups. But, hockey has been rewarding to a lot of the major teams. And that's why I was thinking of a team like Nashville. I was thinking of a team like Winnipeg. Stories that would have been bigger stories in the National Hockey League playoffs if it wasn't for what the Vegas Golden Knights have done. They've done something that has been so amazing and so impressive, so unprecedented, that we may not see it again in the history of professional sports. Now, let's be serious. How much more expansion are we really going to see in all sports? I expect to see 2 more baseball teams come. There probably will be another hockey team at one point. They're sitting at 31 teams right now. I figure it would make sense to even it up with 32. But that would leave 3 major sports with 32 teams. And then basketball, which is a little bit behind right now. But I guess from a determination standpoint, you want to figure out, is it warranted to add more expansion in the NBA? Expansion in the NBA may be a bad thing. Because we talk about the top heaviness as it exists in franchises in the National Basketball Association. We have a chance, and we don't know. Maybe the Celtics get in there. Maybe the Houston Rockets pull and what would be a miraculous upset, even though they are the 1 seed and have the home court advantage. But we're looking at the potential of seeing a 4th straight Golden State Warriors, Cleveland Cavaliers NBA Finals. Now, if that isn't an indication of how top-heavy a league is, or perhaps a league that at the very least has maximized the amount of talent that it could fit in its respective league, you're going to add 2 more teams to that? You're going to water the league down even more than it already is right now? Because there's franchises that can't get out of their own way for years upon years. Unless one of these teams ends up stepping in shit and drafts themselves the next LeBron James or the next Kobe Bryant. You're looking at a series of franchises in the NBA that are going to be bad for a long time. I will say this, and I'll throw a little bit of positiveness in regards to the NBA. You look at the Philadelphia 76ers, you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, 2 teams that have been bad for a long time. And they've developed a series of very good young players that they have drafted coming off of bad seasons. And I said it would have been a very intriguing finals, one that was just about impossible to envision. But it would have been nice to see the 76ers and the Timberwolves. 2 up-and-coming teams, but 2 teams that are not on the level of what you'd see with the Warriors and the Cavaliers and the Rockets and the Celtics. And I think if you were to start the season, who else would you have put in the mix? There were a couple teams that you'd say, hey, maybe they have a little bit of a chance. I wasn't believing in Toronto. I certainly wasn't believing in Oklahoma City. Maybe they were that team that you were thinking about. San Antonio, is always okay, but, they got the Kawhi Leonard situation, a guy essentially refusing to play. So who else were you really expecting to be alive in the NBA playoffs at this point? Now, I think the Celtics do have a chance to win. And I'm pretty much going to close the show by saying that. The Celtics, if they could hold their home court by winning Game 5, they put themselves in a very good position. But I think the Cavaliers have a very good chance to maybe make Game 5 that last possession type of game where maybe it'll come down to the last shot. And I can see Cleveland hitting a big shot and winning Game 5. If they do, I think the Cavs will win it in 6. If the Celtics win Game 5, I think the Celtics are going to win the series. Probably in 7, but possibly in 6. So whoever wins Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals is going to the NBA Finals. You heard it here on the Pass Ball Show. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. We'll be back with you tomorrow once again. If you want to sign up to help with the parish picnic, they're looking for volunteers. If you email Joey Tunn at youthministry@staloysiuschurch.org or call 732-370-0500, extension 202. They're looking for teens in 7th grade through 12th to help host some of these activities. But the parish picnic will be held on Sunday, June 3rd, 2 o'clock at Pine Park in Lakewood. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.